Yeah. Okay, we're recording. We'll call the order the March 1st City of Brainerd Personnel and Finance Committee meeting. We'll start with introduction. Start with the left.
Alderman Kevin Stewart.
City Administrator Jennifer Bergman, Connie Hillman, City Finance Director, Alderman Tiffany Stingron,
And Alderman Gabe Johnson. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight. The first one is to consider a resolution scheduling a public hearing on issuance of revenue obligations by the City of Pierce to finance a project by Horizon.
So this is one of those things that's in state statute, that money cannot be spent in another municipality unless a municipality approves those funds being spent in our city. So we will do this, the state law, or I'm confusing them, but either state or federal calls us to have a public hearing. Whichever one doesn't call for the public hearing says that we have to have a resolution authorizing it. So we will call the public hearing, have it next meeting, and then we'll have another resolution that we'll have to pass saying, yes, it's okay for you to spend this money here in our city.
And it's okay for Pierce and Horizon Health to spend this money. This isn't
It says no Brainerd money. It doesn't affect our rating, doesn't affect if we have to stay qualified or not with our rating. We check that out with our municipal consult or our bond council and consultants, and they all said it's something that's just a requirement.
So the recommended action is adopting the resolution, but we're taking a step back, and our action will be call for a public hearing on March 15th.
No, it's to adopt the resolution, because this resolution calls for the public hearing.
Okay.
We have another one.
So we are adopting a resolution.
Yes.
Okay.
Make a motion to adopt the proposed resolution scheduling a public hearing on the issuance of a revenue obligation by the City of Pierce to finance a property by Horizon Health.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Second item is the discussion of 2022 capital equipment facility budget.
Okay, so, sorry, I'm confused at which computer I'm using, so I'm going to pull this up here. I'm going to share this screen, and I want to, okay, so, we have talked about how we're going to start doing our capital budget earlier in the year, so we're basically going to break the budget up. We've talked about doing capital first, and then doing bonds, and then we'll do the operating at our normal time when we do that. Just going to break it up and have more time for discussion. There's a couple of things that I sent out the information to the department heads to review the capital budgets. A couple of things that came to light is like the Parks Department capital budget will not be completed until the Parks Department interim public works director needs more time. It's kind of going through with the fine-tooth comb and getting it set up differently, and just I think it'll be good in the end, but that is going to take some time. So we won't have the Parks capital budget, and also the Park Board hasn't approved it yet either. We do not know all of our funding sources at this time. I'm thinking we don't even know how much is hopefully going to go in the capital fund from the 2020 budget, let alone if there's some bond issues that fall off that we can fund it. How should the city plan for studies, professional service items? For example, the zoning code update. We budgeted $50,000 over 2 years for that. My recommendation for that is, I know it's not a capital asset in the true form of what a capital asset should be. However, I still like to plan for it in the capital asset, and then we can transfer the budget and make it be out of professional services in that year so that we don't have the peaks and valleys in our operating budget, is my recommendation as far as that goes. Pricing for many of the significant 2022 capital items isn't available yet. We don't have schedules out. They're still working on 2021 models and to try to go ahead. But so I think we should have a discussion on the items above, and then staff's recommendation would be to continue to work on the capital budget, review capital needs, shifting projects around for expenditures, and we will present something to P&F on the March 15th meeting, knowing that it's going to be estimates at this point, and knowing that the parks isn't going to be done and there's a lot of missing pieces yet. But I think that Chair would like to continue to move forward with the plan to make it work.
Yeah, I would. And just to add my 2 cents, do you want to settle these bullet point issues tonight?
Sure.
Okay. I'll start with my thoughts on them. I mean, first with the Parks Department, I know we have the Public Works, Interim Public Works Department, so it's a little different. The Parks Department has been part of the city for, 149 years. So they should have some type of plan in place. And I've been working with you on this, Connie, and pushing for this plan since my first year on the council 7 years ago. It's come a long way. The way I view this is a 30-year plan. So in 1 month, 2 months, insignificant amount of time, doesn't matter on a 30-year. So I still think we should be doing it in March. I understand that they aren't going to be ready, but if we let them push this to August, that's where they'll push it in 2022. So we pay these guys significantly more and they don't want to be. But so I just say we set this capital budget in March, knowing every year it is going to change. Some things are going to be deemed a higher priority at the end of the year or whatnot. But as long as we set the standard that it's done in March, the departments just have to get on board instead of pushing us around as to when we do. Funding sources, well, we have unlimited taxing at the party. And I like your recommendation on the zoning code update, when we save multiple years for a professional service we know we're going to engage in. I think Fund 400 is while it's not a capital acquisition or a capital piece of equipment, it's just a good way to, it's a fund that doesn't reset each year. It's a good way.
And what I would do with that too is just more take the, if like, let's say we did over 50,000, that first year we only spent $20,000 because you got a late start or whatever. I would just reserve some of that fund balance for that. I would transfer the funds from 400, like our savings account, into 400, reserve any fund balance that's left over, and then we can transfer it in the next year. So you're gonna have the expense in your operating, but you also can have that additional revenue in your operating to offset. So even though it's not capital in nature, it'll be planned for so that we're aware of it.
And I like that because it's tough to swallow $100,000 or $200,000 at once. Like when we need new accounting software in 10 years, this time it was $250,000. Next time it might be $400,000, and that's tough to just drop in 1 year while keeping the taxes somewhat stable. So definitely save it.
That would be a capital item per se.
I guess it is software.
Software
Yeah.
is a thing, but your example is, I think the whole idea is.
Yeah, but then they also advertise it for 3 years or something. We need more than 3 years on a $250,000.
I think it's 5, but okay, but still, it's still a lot. The other thing I was thinking about, I'm sorry, Kevin and Tiffany, do you guys have any comments?
Yeah, those were my thoughts on all of this, and if you guys have any thoughts.
The other thing that I would like to do is try to figure out some kind of inflation factor to put into it, with it being 30 years out. What I've told the department heads is put the dollars in that you think today, if you were going to replace that equipment, what that would be. Then I think if we have an inflationary factor that we can put into the spreadsheets, so that when we're looking at that 30 years out, we're going, oh, we have $5 million in our capital account, I think that will help because right now there's no inflationary factor. And, we don't know what the prices will be in that year. And I'm more looking at, I want to see the plan for 30 years, but I'm more concerned about the first 5 years, the first 2 years. Those are the ones that we really kind of need to have nailed down a little bit more. So do we do like a 0.5 inflationary factor or a 1% inflationary factor? Or how do you guys feel about an inflationary factor? Do you think that makes it unrealistic?
I think that whatever number you pick is not going to be right, so you might as well just pick a number.
It's a budget.
Yeah, it's a budget. It's all kind of guessing. I mean, as far as what the inflation rate is going to be, if you have a good guess, let me know. I can make some investments.
Right. I mean, maybe you would look at the last 5-year average, or something like you base it on inflation in the last 5 years, and I don't know. Maybe it's not even important to do.
So I don't know if it is, because, right now we're in 2021, so let's go back to the Minnesota Twins World Championship season of 1991.
Well, wait a minute.
And then predict how much we're gonna pay for a plow this year, or a fire truck this year. Impossible. Nobody would have ever guessed 30 years ago, that ladder trucks are maybe 1.5. Maybe, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, but I think the 30-year plan, especially when you're talking big ticket items like fire trucks or whatever, it's a little different. When you're talking a squad car or something, but I mean, the ladder truck we just bought was $1.2 million. You know, in 2 years it's going to be 1.8, if not 2 million.
And I don't think the dollar amounts are as important as having it on paper that we need to replace the plow truck every other year. We need to replace our engine every 8 years. We need to replace, you know, we have these replacements that need to take place. And yes, we think a plow is worth 200,000 in 30 years, they're going to be 800,000. But if we just put 200,000, we know we got to buy a plow in 2030.
It's fiscally smart to put a kind of calendar on it to say you need an engine every 8 years, because if you don't do that, now all of a sudden you need 2 trucks next year.
And what we've done the last 5-6 years is truck.
So, and that kind of brings up a point too, because when we were looking at the fire advisory board, and we were looking at it, you know, I give them 20 years, I think, when we met to go over the assessments, and they're like, well, we're really gonna have $1.9 million in there? Well, no, not necessarily. You know, it's, you can't say that you were planning so that we don't have to issue debt for anything, but, you know, we don't know what prices are going to be. So what I'm hearing is that we're not concerned necessarily about putting an inflationary factor in. Just do your best guess, and it's more about what year the item's going to be replaced than the cost of the item that is going to be replaced. Do the best you can, but we'll get it when it gets closer.
I think so, because as inflation ticks up over the next decades, our capital levy is going to tick up as well. You know, and we don't know what that is, and we're not going to start making 20-year predictions of what our capital levy is going to be. So I think if you just keep them both at current year prices, it's about as consistent as they can be.
I also think that, you know, if you need to replace something, you need to replace it. I mean, we're gonna end up paying whatever the cost is for whatever the item, the widget is that we need. So I think it's more about being prepared than the exact number.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Anything else on that item?
Thanks. So if you guys have anything else?
Well,
And if you guys have any thoughts, you know, between now and the next meeting, share them with me and Jennifer and Connie, just kind of keep us looped in. We're not a quorum, so we could have a thread.
Well, I like the direction. I think it makes smart sense. Yeah.
And I think, you know, when we present something, but then I think we'll want to, okay, so what are you guys thinking? What would you like to see? And then we can, I mean, I'm thinking that we'll have it on the 15th, but then we'll have it again in the first meeting in April, the second meeting in April. And just to kind of, yep, this is not, now we know more here, and then we'll leave it for a couple, and then we'll come back. And that's how I'm envisioning this working. Okay. All right.
But not to an extent, but also at a certain level, I want you to ingrain in the organization that our 30-year plan is hammered out early in the year.
Yeah.
You know, the changes are made early in the year,
We
not
want
at
to
the
keep
end.
pushing it down.
The thing too, like, we get to a point where we can adopt it, that will help us, because, you know, every time we have a bond rating call, they ask, do you have a capital plan? Well, we have a capital plan, but it's not adopted. You know, they're like, well, why don't you adopt it? Well, it's something that's shared every year, you know, it's just that we haven't formally adopted it yet. So that's something that we can work towards too, as far as bonding. That helps with that too. So that's also another good reason to do it early.
Excellent.
All right, thank you.
Next item is the, sorry, I was looking at the spreadsheet. Next item is the fire contract formula for 2022 information.
Yep, so we met last Tuesday and presented the fire advisory board with their 2022 assessment. I always have to think because, so with the townships, they set their levy for 2022 in March of 2021. So that's why they need the assessment for it. So we pass this out. It is this, so basically what this sheet is these are the costs that the fire contract services areas have agreed to. This is the cost that we should all share. It's our 2021 budget. We have an amount that goes into our capital. There's increased 5% each year. We have an amount in there that's their rent that they pay the city because we own the buildings. Then we have our debt for any of our items that we fall off. So if they choose to put more into the capital than what is in the contract amount, that is in the budget. And then we say, okay, we're going to allocate these costs based 30% of the average 5-year runs, 30% of the population, 30% of the values of the buildings, and 10% of the exempt taxable buildings. And that's how we allocate the costs out. So how the city uses this is when we do our budget for 2022, I'm going to add up all of these, just the funding share part, and that's what we're gonna recognize as revenue in 2022. It does not mean that this is what our city share is of the cost of running the fire department. There are things like civil defense that is not part of the fire capital formula. They do not pay for any building maintenance that we do. So those kind of things are taken out. That's why it might not match to be truly say that that's our share of the budget.
But more or less,
It's pretty close, yes. But like we don't, the BPU revenue that we get, that we allocate to the public safety department, public safety fund, doesn't get passed on to the fire service district, because that is, we have gotten that money back, that's our agreement, we just allocate it based on what we want to, we call the general fund in a one. So that's how we use, that's how the city uses this schedule, and the other entities, we will send them a bill in 2022, and they will send the city of Baxter a bill for $354,000. And then this year down here says why, just for them to be able to compare as to what happened from one year to the next. This year, for 2022, this is the same exact expense allocation as it is for year 2021. The same exact thing, same exact amount. So the only reason, there are 3 reasons the assessment value can change from year to year. One is there's an increase in cost. One, there's a change in the items that we use to allocate the cost, or there's a change to our fire service district. 2 out of those 3 stayed the same for the 2022. So the only reason why the amounts changed for the entities is because these items changed how we allocate the cost. So just to kind of give you a little background, it's hard for me because we're using the 2022, we're using the 2021 budget, we're using the average runs from 16 to 20, we're using a 2019 population, so they're kind of like all over, but they just kind of consistently increase each year. So, and then the debt, this is the amount that we offset what we need for our levy in those years for that as well, because we'll offset. That's what I think when we were going through the budget, we were off a year where we had already finished paying the debt for the equipment certificates, but we still had 1 more year of it coming in from the fire advisory board. So it was a timing issue with that one, so we just continue to work through it as we go along.
Can I get a background on who created this formula?
This formula has been around since I've been around. I want to say Mark O'Day had a big part of it when he was on the council.
Yeah, probably written Mark O'Day, if not sooner.
I know he, at least when he was looking at it, he tweaked it more when he was on the council. I know when Teresa Goble was the city administrator, we went through the contracts all again. I think we really
Dan too.
Yep.
Even when Dan was here.
The last time I remember the formula looked at was before Teresa retired, and I want to say you were chief at that point. There was a subcommittee that met and tweaked it some more. We actually laid it out exactly in the contract. We spelled it out more. We did more of the formula on how
That's 10, 12 years
this
ago.
percentage goes. 9, 8
Because
years
for a
ago.
long time, the fire service districts were begging us to make it simpler, tweak it or do something. And that's when we went and researched it a little bit and tried to maneuver and tweak it. It didn't really change much.
Because before we had the fire service, when did we become how does the rural fire district come into play, Kevin, you know?
The rural fire district?
Yeah.
Oh, years ago, it was like 2 fire departments, a rural fire association and the Brainerd Fire Department. And on the trucks, there was a rural fire association, and there were 2 separate entities. And they had their own gear. So if we would go to a fire that when the page came out and they said, we have a structure fire, we have a rural structure fire, that meant outside the city limits of Brainerd and Baxter. So it could be Southland Lake. So everybody raced to the station, and they had separate gear back then for fires outside the city of Brainerd. And the Rural Fire Association, they paid into that and had their budget. That's how they bought gear. That's how they bought trucks. But then as time moved on, people got smarter and combined all what else is pretty
So I think the contract started when that combined.
Yep.
And I know it was tweaked one time when Mark O'Day was on the council, and I know it got tweaked again about 8-9 years ago.
I really like it. I don't think it's, I don't think it's perfect. I think it could be tweaked again, but I just, as far as multiple agencies coming together to work at one end goal, this makes sense to me.
The service areas have really become much more customer friendly with themselves and the city by doing something like this. Where before it was a battle all the time.
And I wanted to get the township from, Long Lake.
Yeah, could be.
Yes, Long Lake. Their township just paid to put in a new well and something else so that the trucks can fill up. They felt it was important for their residents to put in this well so that they did not have to drive all the way back to basically the state hospital would be when they would have to fill up the truck. And if this works well, they're gonna put another well in another location. And so
Are they putting in wells or are they putting in stem pipes in like lakes?
I thought it was wells.
I don't know.
I thought, the way I understood it last Tuesday, it was wells. And a lot of them were like, so you're putting this in yourself and how do you feel? And so I thought it was real interesting for the fire advisory board to be like, you can make those improvements to your township. It might not help the cost that you're allocating out, but it is going to help your residents. It is going to help so.
Well, it might help their fire service rating too,
It could, because they have a more
because
source.
they got a water supply.
But that's interesting, because your insurance only asks, where's your nearest fire station? Because if you do it the way the crow flies, I'm one way. But if you do it the way the roads go, which they have to go,
See,
then I'm
now,
different.
we go to a structure fire outside the city limits where there's no hydrants. At some point, you gotta start shoveling water. So that's when we call for mutual aid from, could be just like yours or wherever, to get enough tenders in place to shuttle water so you don't run out of water.
Oh, so you just gotta have a chain.
So you have a chain going back and forth, but years ago, we'd run out of water, and we'd sit there until we get water.
And so that's why they're.
So that's why she started with the well, and then they don't have to run from, say, South Long Lake to the state hospital in here, right? They can go to that well where it's, I'm guessing that they're centrally locating it in their coverage area.
And they have plans for a couple more, so.
And they're not expensive to put in.
I thought it was about 20 to 30,000.
That's expensive for a township.
We get a lot of questions about this, and we share this formula with a lot of people. I know that, other ones that have, the city of Crosby usually calls and said, how do you figure this out? I think they kind of modeled their agreement maybe a little bit after ours. It's at least it feels like it's fair. It's upfront, it's in there, it's, like you said, it might not be the perfect formula. I mean, we could do this 10 million different ways, honestly, in the different factors, but
Don't break it every time.
this seems to be fixed. This
And
seems
it's,
to be.
Citizen may not like that. We're paying 43%. We're paying $570,000. But when you look at it, it's like, well, a third of it is on our population, a third of it is on the number of runs we've had. It's all based in real data that is easy to understand. And I just really like it. And I wish economic development.
I should have this formula with the economic development as well, but what can you do? Well, maybe it's number of calls, maybe it's number of business that be located, maybe it's your tax base, maybe it's, there's all kinds of different formulas that
Okay, that's informational. Do you want to go over it in the full council
No,
meeting?
not necessarily. I think it was
I
just.
don't think it's all news. I think it's all news.
But it kind of advice for you guys to know when we're budgeting and how we work, how we use this to put into our budget, but I don't know if full council needs to be aware of it or not. That's your call.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, I like new council members like to get this information. Yeah, it's easy to assume that, well, everybody knows this, it's old stuff. So Mike might like this explained, but I imagine you could talk to Mark too.
And I would, all he has
We're
to
still
do.
starting at 8:30.
All he has to do
I'm
is.
just trying to, I'm gonna bore the citizens off the phone.
I asked Tad Erickson, because he's a fire advisory board rep, and so when I presented to the fire board, I have a whole thing of like, this one and this, and then kind of draw it out, like, here's your budget, this is how this matches, and I asked him, I said, do you think council would want all of that, or do they think just want the sheet? He said, you know what, you could just do the sheet, he said. And like I told the fire advisory board, just give me a call. I said, I can walk it through, I've got one guy that wants it to share with his other members. I'm gonna send it off to him, and he said it explains it, but now I can have time to digest it. And I said, if you have any questions, just give me a call. So to do that.
Okay, anything else for the committee? Seeing none, we'll adjourn at 7:25, and we have 5 minutes to get upstairs.